All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our 2025 preview and prediction for the Tennessee Volunteers. Looking at this coaching staff remains intact. Josh Heupel as the head coach, 37-15 through 4 seasons. Joey Hazel enters his third year in role as offensive coordinator, and then Tim Banks. He's been in the role since 2021 as the defensive coordinator, likely to be in line for a head coaching gig here this upcoming off season. For the Volunteers, 11th ranked high school class. They didn't do much in the portal, ranking only 79th. And then, of course, last year was a successful season, going 10-3. They did lose in the first round of the CFP to Ohio State in embarrassing fashion. Getting things started with this offense, Nick. Of course, the top headline is the biggest one I've ever seen in a college football offseason, where 5-star recruit Nico Amaleva, after 1 year of starting, decides to enter the portal purely over money, and he ends up transferring for significantly less. Obviously, this was a pretty embarrassing moment for the program, but they made the correct decision to go ahead and move on from Nico. And they basically did a trade of UCLA. Joey Aguilar is likely to be a starting quarterback now if he comes over. Of course, he was at Appalachian State the last 2 years. We'll talk about him in a moment. But this is a tough situation for them, Nick, as a football team. And obviously, Nico didn't live up to expectations last year. Didn't play that great, but at the same time, he was in his first year as a starter. He's still a former high-end recruit. And they were already losing a significant amount of production on this offense. So Nico entering the portal has significant ramifications, not just across college football, but for this offense as well. And of course, this fan base, they're going to expect results, but I think they're going to be totally fine and content with a season that's not as up to par this fall, because they know what the circumstances include, and that's losing their starting quarterback, that is. And I think they'll be quite proud of this staff and the program for going ahead and letting him walk, because that's inexcusable. It's not cool one bit for your starting quarterback to just leave because of money. So I can respect that in all regards, but it really does put them in a tough predicament.
Nico and his selfish decision, and well, I should say his parents and advisors' selfish decision to seek more NIL money has put the Tennessee Volunteers offense in a pretty tricky situation, and it's kind of, shoehorned them into a rebuild year that they really weren't hoping for, but that's kind of what they have to settle for at this moment in time, because this offense took a big step back losing Nico. I know he had some tough moments last year. He had a lot of overthrows, struggled with accuracy at times, had some iffy games, had some games where he really wasn't up to snuff, but still, at the end of the day, losing your star quarterback, a former 5-star quarterback, one of the highest ranked recruits in your program's history at the quarterback position, probably your highest ranked recruit since Peyton Manning, really, at the quarterback position, to walk on you like that over an NIL dispute is a tough spot. I totally agree with you, right? Tennessee made the right decision. You had to cut bait, cut him loose before this became a locker room headache. It all unfolded very quickly back when this story broke. It really felt like dominoes fell immediately. They fell very quickly, very rapidly, and Tennessee, I think, did the best thing they could do given the unprecedented nature of this situation. They go out and land Joey Aguilar, who I think is a really good ad, a nice ad from App State, and obviously we're going to talk about him in a second and really kind of build up what he could look like for this offense. But it's disappointing if you're a Tennessee fan, right? This is a team that was in the college football playoff last year. The schedule is quite favorable this upcoming season, so you were hoping to get back to the big dance. Losing your star quarterback like that late in the cycle really is a huge blow, takes the wind out of your sails, and puts this offense in a little bit of peril here. Certainly a tumultuous couple of months for the Tennessee fans here, and this offense is certainly going to suffer following what happened, even if they made the right decision by letting Nico go.
This quarterback room was in complete flux. They only had 2 scholarship guys. Jake Merklinger only threw 9 passes as a 4-star freshman last year. It's a guy who doesn't have all that powerful of an arm, has good touch, adjusts velocity well. He can throw on the move, pretty adequately. Fits the scheme well as a good distributor, and he has plenty of RPO experience from high school. They consider him a good decision maker as well. They have a 4-star true freshman in George McIntyre from Brentwood, and then a walk-on in Ryan Dameron, that is, sorry. And then, of course, Joey Aguilar comes over. I heard they had made an offer. They were trying to do some tampering with Josh Hoover from TCU, and man, that would have been a beautiful fit, but obviously that didn't work out for him. So they're going to go and get Aguilar, who I'm excited to see what he can do at, a Power 5 or Power 4 level, that is. 6,700 yards, 56 touchdowns the last 2 years for App State. I thought this is a guy that did a pretty good job throwing the football. He was a productive player for App State. Had some pretty respectable pass catchers as well for the Mountaineers. Biggest problem is he's got 24 interceptions over those 2 years as a starter. In a 10-point loss against UL Lafayette, he had 4 of them. He completed less than 50%. Had a lot of games like that, Nick, where he just wasn't very accurate. As a whole, 55.6% comp rate this past year. It was significantly worse than he was back in 2023. So I think there's a lot to like with this kid. In terms of the turnovers, he's going to have to cut that down. What do you think he's going to be able to accomplish here? Now he has to go from App State to now stepping into the SEC.
I think it's certainly a big jump going from App State to the SEC, but I do think this is a solid add given the circumstance they found themselves in. There weren't a lot of options late in the cycle where Tennessee needed to go grab a quarterback. Josh Hoover, Kurt certainly would have been a hell of a quarterback to plug into this system. But you're in a tough spot, and bringing in Joey Aguilar, I think, is the best you could do. Share the positives, right? We'll start with the positives. Over 3,000 yards passing the past 2 seasons, 20-plus touchdowns the past 2 seasons, 23 in 2024 and 33 in 2023. Also had a couple rushing touchdowns in both seasons. But the interceptions are a problem, right? 14 last year, 10 the year before that, a 55% comp rate last year really is not super flattering on paper. You highlighted that game against Lafayette where he had the 4 interceptions. Not a good showing there. Had 2 against Coastal Carolina in a game that was a little sloppy. Had 2 against Georgia Southern as well in a game that he was sloppy at the end of the season. Had 2 against ECU. So there's multiple games of multiple interceptions. Also had 2 against Marshall earlier in the year. So he had several games, 5 games right there with multiple interceptions, which is certainly not something you want to see. A couple of games with a below 50% comp rate. There were some games that were a lot stronger though. Right there, some more positive games on this slate as well. He did almost have 300 yards passing in that aforementioned game against Marshall and had 300 yards passing and 3 touchdowns against Georgia State, and a really good performance for him there. This is a guy that's been around the sport for a while, has some good experience playing at App State, which is not a low-level program by any stretch of the imagination. I think he'll fit in here pretty well. If he can get the accuracy up and really avoid the turnovers, they could have a really solid stopgap quarterback here.
Now, the most notable loss of this football team from last year was at the running back position, Dylan Sampson. This is a guy years ago I told you Nick was going to be great, and he ended up being the Offensive Player of the Year in the conference last season. So he's probably the biggest loss here, but I think this group has good depth. Peyton Lewis had some bright moments, showed good straight line speed, ability to let his blocks set up. Deshaun Bishop was the number 2 back in 2024. Quick feet, can fit through gaps, so he was used in short yardage often. He had 1 catch in week 1. That was it all year. Star Thomas, he's been a good, consistent runner in his career. He's primarily been a zone runner. Pretty good backfield here, but it will be tough to replace Sampson, so I expect a by-committee approach here unless one of these guys can break out.
It'll be extremely tough to replace Sampson, who's such a star player for this team. It was really dominant on the ground. It was certainly a big force in the red zone. I think Bishop's a really solid back, 450 for him on the ground last year, 6.1 yards per attempt and 3 scores, solid numbers there. Peyton Lewis showed me in flashes that he has some serious skill for this team. 330 yards rushing, 5.3 yards per attempt, and 3 scores for him last year. Not bad at all. And they added a solid player in Star Thomas, who's been around the game for a while, a graduate senior, who has some good experience playing at various levels. A guy that you can plug in here was at previously at New Mexico State, was at Duke. So he's been around the game for a while. A guy that's a veteran player, had 7 rushing touchdowns last year for the Blue Devils, so not a bad add at all. A by-committee approach certainly forthcoming for this offense, but I think this is still a room where you feel pretty confident if you're a Tennessee fan here.
Now you look at the pass-catching group. Chris Brazel, he was the big add from last year's portal class. He was straight up poor. Lots of targets, but he had limited production. Also had 6 drops. 6'5", 200 with speed that will need to up his play to stay in the lineup after being a big, play receiver for Tulane back in 2023. High-ranked recruit Mike Matthews barely saw the field last season. Has strong hands and good speed. Will likely become the top pass catcher this year. Braylon Staley was also a top 80 recruit who saw a few snaps. He's an athletic playmaker. Should be a great vertical threat for this offense. Amari Jefferson transfers in from Alabama, not playing for them last fall. They also picked up 2 4-stars in this upcoming class. The returning starting tight end, Miles Kiltzman, is great. He had 4 touchdowns, all against inferior opponents, though. Depth is not all that great in the pass-catching group. I think there's great upside and some nice talent here, but you're going to be trying to break in a new quarterback, and last year at times they struggled to separate or make plays for their quarterback, Nick, and now that they lose, their top 3 guys from last year, I'm not really sure what the upside is for this passing attack overall.
A bit of a weaker room, certainly. A bit of a concerning room when you look at that. I think the running back room, you can overcome some of the deficiencies based off what they have in terms of depth. The depth here in the wide receiver room, I'm a little more worried about. I think Brazel's a solid player. Obviously, you saw that in the past at his previous stop. He was a really good player there, 333 yards receiving, 11.5 yards grabbing, 2 scores, was just downright poor, did not really get the type of catches that he was hoping to get. I think Miles Kitzman's a great tight end, right? I think they bring back him. He's really solid, 300 yards receiving and 4 scores for him. He's going to be a big focal point of this offense. I think he's a solid player. They returned some other guys who had, limited reps last year. Mike Matthews, maybe he can break out this year. He's a younger player that will get some more reps. Braylon Staley as well as a guy they want to see a lot out of. They added some freshmen from this recruiting class that they hope can step up early on. Amari Jefferson was a decent add out of the portal as well, who didn't really do a whole lot, but still has a lot of high upside potential here for this offense. I'm worried about this wide receiver room, right? This is a room that's got some shallow depth, not a whole lot of experience here, and you're plugging in a quarterback that's new to the conference, new to the system. Certainly could be a bit of a difficult slippery slope here for this wide receiving room.
Now we look at the offensive line. I was a big fan of this group going into the last season, and they played pretty well all season. And now they're going to be, I think, just as good, if not better, in 2025. Lance Hurd at left tackle, 6'6", 340. Struggled in his first year as a starter, but that's been kind of a common thing amongst young players in this conference. He's an X5-star, so he should be playing much better this season. Shamurad Yermarov, an ex-top 120 recruit, enters his third year finally in line for some meaningful playing time. He's in a battle with Sam Pendleton, who was a very quality starter this past season for Notre Dame and went to the national title. Max Anderson has big shoes to fill at center, but he's 6'5", 311. I love the addition of Wendell Moe. This guy from Arizona was one of the best pass blockers in the country at right guard this past year. Only 1 sack allowed total in 3 seasons, so he's going to be easily filled in there at one of those spots. And then David Sanders, the 11th ranked recruit in this freshman class, he's going to be penciled in at right tackle, I would believe. One of my starting lineup has Moe at left guard, that is, and Pendleton at right guard. I think both those guys have experience in those 2 respective positions. Moe being at left guard pretty much his entire career for Arizona. I think this is going to be a great offensive line, Nick. It's one of the better ones in the conference.
I think it's one of the better ones in the conference. I certainly think this is a really good unit. I'll start with Moe, who they add from Arizona. Will be really good at left guard. Could also play right guard, although he took a lot of snaps. Previously at Arizona at left guard, like you said there. So I think it makes sense for him to play at left guard. This is a guy that was out of California. I like the size of him, 6'2", 335. Really good in pass protection, solid in run protection as well. Only gave up that 1 sack last year at Arizona. A really high-end ad, a guy that I think can do a lot. Versatile, can play left or right guard. David Saunders, a really great recruit for them, right? A top 15 recruit in terms of the offensive line. Certainly a guy that you want to get a lot of out of, coming from North Carolina, 6'6", 290. This kid's huge, right? This kid's going to plug in early. Certainly will be tough early on adjusting to the speed of play at the SEC level, that is, and FBS level, but a very talented player nonetheless, so I think you slot in at right tackle, have no issues. Sam Pendleton, I think, was another really good ad out of the portal. I think he's a guy you can get a lot out of, a guy coming from Notre Dame. They know how to produce talented offensive line pieces. I think he'll be really good for this team. Probably going to play him at right guard. Max Anderson showed me a lot last year. He improved. Lance Hurd as well improved and looked good throughout the season. I love this unit. If you want a high upside part of this offense, it's going to be this O-line. A phenomenal unit here that returns some solid assets and really adds 3 key pieces. I love this O-line here.
Now looking at the verdict for this offense, one thing we didn't talk about is overall they just were not very good in conference play. I mean, they did a pretty good job running the football, but they didn't have that ideal balance. And they only scored 25 points per game in conference play. You look at the numbers on screen, they're really good, right, Nick? But this is a team that runs it up the score. 56 on UTEP, 69 on Chattanooga, 71 on Kent State. It's the same thing Ole Miss does. It's honestly quite annoying, and it really skews their numbers significantly because as soon as they enter conference play, they forget how to play football, it seems. Very gloomy outlook for an offense that struggled in the SEC. Now resets with significant losses across the board, and morale might be, hurt in the locker room potentially due to that situation with their starting quarterback departing. This is a complex scheme that relies on stout quarterback play. If Aguilar or Merklinger, whoever plays, can, produce like a veteran, and his supporting cast can step up to the plate, and this group will be solid. The expectations are going to struggle major. That's why I'm giving it a B. I think they'll be able to run the ball quite solid, and I think the line will produce good results, but this passing attack is probably going to struggle a great deal.
Certainly some flawed statistics here when you look at that, right? 12th in the nation in points per game. While they ran the score up against some really bad opponents in non-conference play, they struggled to score during conference play, had a lot of low-scoring games there. When you look at the rush yards per game, that's a solid number, right? Top 10 number in the nation. Yards per game was top 15, but the pass yards per game was poor, right? 220 last year for them, 77th in the nation. Just not good enough from Tennessee offense. The outlook for me is pretty bleak, considering they lose their signal caller, as part of the drama. Joey Aguilar, I think, is a good quarterback, but a tough situation to plug into. I think this wide receiver room is very unproven and concerns me. Running back room, a by-committee approach, expected to fall off in terms of a lot of these stats this upcoming season. Definitely a difficult spot for this offense. I trust Heupel because he's a genius play caller, but this is certainly a very tough spot for his offense to be in.
Now I move to the defensive side of the ball. This is a legit unit that could compete with most people in the country. Of course, they ran into a train in Ohio State that obviously it was expected that was going to happen, at least from me. I don't think it's any slouch on how this defense played because I really thought it was a great unit. They don't add any guys in the portal. They return 8 starters. They picked up 2 top 100 ranked defensive linemen as well. They had 100 tackles for loss. Some big losses up front, but they also have some great returnees. Joshua Josephs, he's going to be the top one. Really shined as a run defender. His great length and agility should have a good pass rushing production this upcoming season. Dominic Bailey at 6'3", 292 was a solid contributor. He'll need to step up his play as a full-time starter, though. He and Tyree West should be very good while sharing an edge position. Caleb Herring enters his 3rd year. Was a top-ranked prospect in the state of Tennessee. Hopeful he'll provide a good spark. Nice pass rush upside here with the rotation and the talent off the edge. And on the interior, they return Bryson Eason, who's a good run stopper, brought some good playmaking to this defense at 6'3", 310. Jackson Moai at 300 pounds hasn't really provided much in his career. A few seasons at Stanford and one here last fall. David Hobbs, 6'4", 300 was solid, but will be leaned on a great deal. Jamal Wallace, Nathan Robinson, both at 300-plus pounds. I think this is a solid group here. Outside of Eason, who's going to step up as a top dog on the interior, remains to be seen. But I think this is going to be one of the better pass rushes, Nick. I think that, Josephs and West or Bailey, whoever's going to be that second guy, it's going to be a really formidable tandem.
This is a really good pass rush here. I think Josephs is clearly your alpha here, your top dog. 39 total tackles last year, 9 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 3 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles. A really do-it-all guy here. I think you pair him with Bailey. I think Bailey will be a really solid player to pair with him at this moment in time. This is a guy you can get a lot out of in Dominic Bailey. I think there's a lot more left in the tank for him. 25 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries for him last year. Solid numbers there. Bryson Eason, I was impressed with him on the film. 24 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. And then Devin Hobbs as well with 20 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Jackson Moai, maybe you get more out of him. Caleb Herring, this is a guy that's been around the program for a while. Maybe you get something out of him. Tyree West, he's been around the program for a while as well. Maybe you'll get something out of him this year. I like this unit here. This is a good pass rush that was really strong last year. They lost some production, but they have some solid guys returning as well.
Hey, look at the middle of this defense. They returned both starters. Arian Carter was solid in coverage. Struggled to be a consistent force versus the run, though. Jeremiah Tailander, on the other hand, was great versus the run, but he himself was poor in coverage. So both of them were being, first-year starters. I thought they showed good promise. I'm very excited for the improvements this fall. Jordan Burns and Edwin Spillman, both second-year guys who saw limited snaps. Those guys are going to be the second-string guys. Jaden Harmon, is a 4-star. It's coming into this class. Could be used in emergencies. Solid room here. Depth, I don't think, is as well established, but they pretty much get everybody back from last year, so I'm not really too worried about it. I know at one point a couple years ago, Nick, we were certainly worried about the future of this linebacking room, and they've went ahead and handled that tidal wave with ease, as I think they're well established here in the middle.
I think they've added some solid, returned some solid pieces. They've done really well here to get 2 linebackers back that have been really solid for this team. I think you want to start with Carter, who's a really good player for this team, the top returning tackler from last year. 68 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss for him, plus a pick. He's a guy that's really solid. And then Telander is a really good player as well. 43 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and a pass breakup. They kind of balance each other's weaknesses out there, where one's weak in pass coverage, the other's really good in pass coverage. One's weaker in tackling, one's better in tackling. I think this is a really good pairing here. These are 2 guys that know each other pretty well. They've played together now for a little bit here. They return into the system feeling good. I like what they got here at linebacker.
Look at the back end. This is a secondary is very stout last fall, and it's headlined by the top cornerback, most people believe, in Jermod McCoy. Has great ball tracking skills, was frequently in phase with opposing wide receivers when playing off, rarely fell for double moves, showcasing great start-stop ability, great agility and quickness. Physical player. He was called for 8 flags. Wasn't perfect in coverage. He allowed 300-plus yards, but this is, the consensus top quarterback or cornerback that is in CFB, Nick, according to most people. And on the other side, you have Ricky Gibson. He was very good as well. This might be the top cornerback duo in all of college football. Do you agree?
Yeah, this could certainly be the top duo in college football. I think McCoy, he's a phenomenal player, right? 44 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 4 picks, 9 pass breakups. Certainly earning and pulling his weight there at corner. I think he's a really talented player that they bring back, getting more experience at that left cornerback position. His partner, and Ricky Gibson's another veteran player who's got good experience, 32 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 5 pass breakups, a really good coverage asset. Love these 2 corners here. Definitely one of the best in the nation. Definitely one of the best in the SEC. A phenomenal duo here.
And you look at the guys behind them. Jalen McMurray, he was really good in his rotational snaps. Caleb Beasley, on the other hand, didn't play much, but he'll be in a similar role this year. Boo Carter, the high-ranked true freshman from last year's class, played full-time in the slot. Struggled in coverage, but he was good versus the run, and I think he's going to be a big breakout player for the secondary. Should enter star territory, I would assume. Andre Turrentine returns as a starter at safety. He was below average in most areas and has major shoes to fill with the departure of Will Brooks. Jacoby Thomas, he also recently departed in this spring portal cycle, so it leads them to be, pretty thin at the safety position. Edrais Farouk, true sophomore, looks like he'll now step into a role. They also have Jackson Matthews, a redshirt freshman. So they don't have much experience at the safety position. I think Tim Banks is going to be able to, in this 4-2-5 scheme up a defense that keeps the secondary sheltered and it won't be that big of an issue. On the other hand, they also just added Colton Hood, who was expected to be, I think, a starter for Colorado this past year at corner. So the cornerback position, I'm really confident in. Safety, Nick, not as much. But again, I think they're going to be kind of sheltering these safeties, at least early on in the season, to where they won't be, straight-up liabilities.
Safety is certainly a bit of a weaker position here on this defense, but I like Boo Carter returning. I think he's showed a lot of high upside last year. 38 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss for him. A pick as well. He's a guy that you can get a lot out of. Turrentine, he's got to improve certainly this year. 37 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a pick, and 3 pass breakups. I'm not too worried about the secondary unit. I think they've added, they have enough pieces. The depth may be a little bit weaker at safety, certainly, but I think these are some guys that can find a way to be strong for this unit. Overall, I like this defense a lot. I think the secondary has really 2 corners that can anchor it down, so I'm not as concerned with deficiencies in the safety group.
One thing I noticed with the secondary last year is, even though they were one of the nation's best, and they might be once again, is when this pass rush that was very good failed to give an assist, they struggled big to be in sync in zone coverage, and they weren't as polished in man, Nick. So the responsibilities are going to be more on their shoulders this year, is because I definitely expect a bit of a regression from the pass rush. We still gave it high praise, and I think it's the biggest strength of this defense. I guess according to my PowerPoint, you would say otherwise. I still think it's going to be a big strength, though, but it's not going to be as much upside as it was last year. So the secondary is going to have to play better on a more consistent basis.
Right, you're a little bit concerned about what they can look like in man. I think their man coverage last year was a bit suspect at times. I think some of the zone coverage was stronger. Can they play better in man? I think certainly the corners have a really good opportunity to play man defense strong for this team. I like the pass rush, right, but it's just losing a little bit because you do lose James Pierce, Omar Norman-Lott, Amari Thomas. These are guys that were really phenomenal for this defense that end up getting drafted in the NFL draft. So you're going to look to see a little bit less from this defensive line. The production will certainly drop a little bit. Can the secondary overcompensate? I think that's certainly you have to keep an eye on.
More importantly, those guys you just rattled off helped big time against the run. Elite run defense, one of the nation's best, under 3 yards per carry allowed last season. Final verdict from me, they should be a very good unit once again. Despite some big losses up front, they still have good size and some underrated talent. Most importantly, they have good experience, though. Impressed with the linebacking duo, and I think the secondary has some legit ball players. A- for me. Am I overvaluing them, Nick, or does that make a lot of sense to you?
No, I think this is an A unit here. This is a unit that's got some really high upside. The linebacking core, I think it's 2 guys you return that are experienced, that have been playing together, that are really solid. The defensive line, yes, it loses a lot of powerful assets, but they bring back a lot of guys who have got decent reps, some experience, some guys that can take that next step forward. I like the secondary unit a lot. I think the corners are 2 really great corners in McCoy and Gibson. The safety group, yes, is a little bit concerning, but I think Boo Carter will take a huge step forward this year. I think this is an A defense for me, right? This is a defense that's still really talented. The stats may not be the same as last year. I don't think they're going to have, below, 17, 18 points per game, but this is still a very strong unit that will find a way to put pressure on the quarterback, and the secondary will find a way to force turnovers.
We're going to schedule in the prediction for Tennessee. The defense will be forced to carry them heavily in 2025, and they're capable of beating most opponents on what's a pretty weak schedule. The issue with Tennessee is the Nico transfer took them from being in peril to DEFCON 5, as they weren't very good in SEC play, and the pass game struggled mightily. UT excels at running the ball, though, and they should still do that at a high rate this year. I think they're going to be hard. They're going to be hard out on a weekly basis, especially if this offense can exceed expectations. Don't sleep on the Vols. I know the ceiling isn't going to be very high, though. This is a team I think can certainly compete, Nick, and I'm eyeing that game week 3 against Georgia. I know they shouldn't win that game, but it being that early on in the season, a home contest with this defense against an offense that's going to be for Georgia that's also trying to figure out a lot of things. Very winnable game for them. That's a big-time trap game early on for the Bulldogs. I think after that, it's not too tough. The home game at Oklahoma, I think they'll go ahead and win that one behind a strong defensive effort. I think they have no shot at Alabama or at Florida, Nick, unless the defense plays like the 85 Bears, which they certainly could, but I don't think those are winnable games for them. September 13th, though, is.
Simply put, the most fascinating team in the SEC this offseason. So much went down with Tennessee, so much at stake, and they were already a fascinating team prior to all the Nico drama, which is funny enough, a lot of the fascination relied on whether or not Nico was going to take that step forward. Now he's out of the equation. That completely spins the whole story, spins the whole ship, and puts this team into even more interesting position. I'm high on this defense. I think this defense is really good. I think the offense is what really concerns me here, and maybe it's harsh. I'm going to 8-4 here. Maybe Tennessee fans won't like what I have to say. I was potentially leaning at 7-5. I think that Syracuse game is a tougher game than people are giving them credit for. Yes, I know it's in Atlanta, so the Tennessee fans will travel from Knoxville for that matchup, but I think Syracuse is still going to be a really good team despite their question marks, and that game will be a lot closer than I think people will give that game credit for. This is still a Tennessee team that's got a phenomenal defense. I just worry about the offense. What will Aguilar look like moving from App State to Tennessee? That's a tough jump. The pass catching group, it's just a weak unit, right? This is a young, inexperienced unit that's quite weak. They're losing an incredible back in Dylan Sampson. They're going to have to find a way to replace their production between 3 different guys. The by committee approach is sometimes it gambles, sometimes it booms like it has at Georgia in the past, but sometimes it busts. I think it's leaning closer to bust than it is leaning to boom. I love this offensive line, a very deep unit with a lot of good experience, and the players they added, including a true freshman and 2 transfers, are phenomenal adds. I think will plug in perfectly. This defense is a really strong unit with 2 great corners that lead the way and 2 strong linebackers. The schedule is not very tough, but it also has some weird tough quirks. Back-to-back road trips to Alabama and Kentucky. That's quite fascinating. That trip to Tuscaloosa is always vaunting. This Tennessee team has not won in Tuscaloosa in a very long time, and I certainly don't think they will do so this year. A trip to the Swamp late in the season is never easy. Should be a very difficult matchup there. Outside of that, though, right, could they beat Oklahoma in Knoxville? Certainly think so, but right now I think Oklahoma wins that matchup. Could they catch Georgia sleeping early in the season? I certainly think so. That's a team that's got a lot of question marks with Gunnar Stockton at the helm. This is a Tennessee team that's really fascinating, right? They're a team you're going to want to watch every single week to see what happens with them. I trust Heupel. I like the coaching staff a lot here. I just think 8-4 is where they fall right now. And, that certainly would be disappointing to a Tennessee fan if you told them that in January after they made the playoff. But after everything that's happened this offseason, they're considering this much of a rebuild year down in Knoxville. I think they'll take 8-4 pretty easily, go to a high-value bowl game, maybe win that bowl game and reload, recycle for the year after that. Tough times certainly right now, and maybe it feels a little doom and gloom down in Knoxville, but I think this team is set for the future. Just write this year off, move on to the future, and there will be a lot of positivity down there in Knoxville.
Hey, I'm not going to fully write it off, because if they beat Georgia, Nick, I think playoffs are in their future at 10-2, even if they lose those 2 games and the schedule plays out like I have it predicted, and they in fact beat Georgia. I think playoffs might be in that future for them.
Certainly at 10-2, they'd be in the playoffs if they find a way to beat Georgia. That's a huge marquee win at home early in the season. It does benefit them. Maybe you catch the Bulldogs sleeping. 10-2, this team is not getting left out of the college football playoff.
That's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.